We are called to be the church, to celebrate God's presence, to live with respect in creation, to love and to serve others, to seek justice and resist evil, to proclaim Jesus crucified and risen, our judge and our hope. Words from a new creed. Words that speak to who we are. Wednesday, coming up, June 10th, will be the 95th anniversary of a gathering in the Mutual Street Arena in Toronto, where representatives from the Presbyterian Church, the Methodist Church, and the Congregationalist Church gathered together to sign the basis of union to become the United Church of Canada. At that point, they had a vision. It had been a vision that had been growing for about 20 years by then. A vision of a national church, a united and uniting church, where more denominations would join in over the years. 95 years later, I think it's safe to say their vision hasn't quite come true as they might have hoped. But what is our vision? Where do we see ourselves when the United Church of Canada marks its centennial? Where do we see ourselves in 5 years? What does it mean to be the church today? We live in a world right now which is bringing up all sorts of questions about what the future will bring. What will we carry on into a different world post-COVID? More and more times I see articles, or at least memes, suggesting we don't want to go back to normal because normal wasn't necessarily working. It wasn't working for the church, it wasn't working for society. So we want to create a new normal. What might that new normal look like? There are possibilities. The new normal may be a world where we take more seriously discussions around who is included. Whether that be in terms of LGBTQ plus individuals, remembering that it is Pride Month. Or whether we look seriously at issues of racism in both Canadian and US culture. And ask ourselves, what do we do differently to fix that? I've got thoughts on that, but that's a whole other sermon. But it's important for the church to be part of the discussions, because the church is the place where we proclaim to follow the Christ who said, "Love one another as I have loved you. And by this shall all men know that you are my disciples, that you have loved one for another." It's worth considering that when we move into a new normal, we will leave some things behind. That's how we create a new normal. And so, I think the verse which was used in the inaugural service for the United Church of Canada still holds true today. "Very truly I tell you, unless a grain of wheat falls into the earth and dies, it remains a single grain. But if it dies, it bears much fruit." For us to be the church we need to be in 5 years, in 10 years, in 2 years, we may have to let go of things. We may have to let some things die so that something new may grow. That's not going to be easy. It's never easy. Unfortunately, we're not called to the church because it's easy. We're called to be the church. As I was preparing this week, I was drawn to another one of our faith statements, a song of faith. This is what it has to say about the church. "We sing of a church seeking to continue the story of Jesus by embodying Christ's presence in the world. We are called together by Christ as a community of broken but hopeful believers loving what he loved, living what he taught, striving to be faithful servants of God in our time and place. Our ancestors in faith bequeathed to us experiences of their faithful living. Upon their lives, our lives are built. Our living of the gospel makes us part of this communion of saints, experiencing the fulfillment of God's reign, even as we actively anticipate a new heaven and a new earth. The church has not always lived up to its vision. It requires the Spirit to reorient it, helping it to live an emerging faith while honoring tradition, challenging it to live by grace rather than entitlement, for we are called to be a blessing to the earth. We sing of God's good news lived out, a church with purpose, faith nurtured and hearts comforted, gifts shared for the good of all, resistance to the forces that exploit and marginalize, fierce love in the face of violence, human dignity defended, members of a community held and inspired by God, corrected and comforted, instrument of the loving Spirit of Christ, creation's mending. We sing of God's mission. That last stanza, it's not the last stanza in the whole song, the last stanza of that section speaks to me of what we strive to be. A church with purpose, where faith is nurtured and hearts are comforted. Gifts are shared for the good of all. Resistance to the forces that exploit and marginalize. Fierce love in the face of violence. Human dignity defended. Members of a community held and inspired by God, corrected and comforted. That's our vision. God is still calling us to be the church. Not in the same ways it called those people who gathered in that arena 95 years ago. Not in the same ways it called my grandparents in the 50s. Not in the same ways it called my parents in the 70s and 80s. Probably not even the same way that we were called to be the church 19 years ago when I knelt in St. David's United and had hands laid on me for my ordination. The church is a moving target. What God calls us to be is always a moving target. But we're called to be faithful. We're called to challenge the world, to envision a new way of being. Last week at Pentecost, we heard Peter say, using words from the prophet Joel, your old men will dream dreams. Your women will see visions. In today's readings, I saw a new heaven and a new earth. For the first heaven and the first earth had passed away, and the sea was no more. I saw the holy city, the new Jerusalem, coming down out of heaven. God will be with them. God will wipe every tear from their eyes. Death will be no more. Mourning and crying and pain will be no more, for the first things have passed away. Then he said to me, it is done. I am the Alpha and the Omega, the beginning and the end. To the thirsty I will give water as a gift from the spring of the water of life. That's the God who calls us to be the church. The Alpha and the Omega, the beginning and the end. The one who proclaims the new kingdom, the new Jerusalem, for the old one has passed away. We aren't called to be the church in the same way. We're called to be the church online. We're called to be the church that gathers in ways both physical and virtual. We're called to be the church that challenges old ideas around sexuality. Remembering that 50 years ago, the United Church would have stood firmly in the belief that LGBTQ plus individuals didn't really fit. We're called to be the church which stands up and holds up a mirror to the world and says, there's something wrong here. in terms of racial justice, in terms of economic justice, in terms of gender justice. It won't be easy. We need a new dream. We need a new vision. This might be part of it. Let the dreams we dream be larger than we've ever dreamed before. Let the dream of Christ be in us. Open every door. Draw the circle wide. Draw it wider still. Let this be our song. No one stands alone, standing side by side. Draw the circle wide. The world as we know it isn't the world as we want it. The church as we know it may not be the church as we want it. We're not called to perfection. We're called to faithfulness. We're called to try our best as we sing the song of the church. And God is with us, giving us the dream, showing us a way. And so we can say with Paul, I consider that the sufferings of the present time are not worth comparing with the glory about to be revealed. For the creation waits with eager longing for the revealing of the children of God. We know that the whole creation has been groaning in labor pains until now. May the God who calls us to be the church, may the God who calls us to share the good news, who calls us to comfort the afflicted, who calls us to be prophetic and hold up that mirror, be with us as we struggle, as we strive to understand what it means to be the church, moving further into the 21st century. I invite you to join me on the journey as we together try to understand our dreams.